Let me tell you about the day I stopped feeling safe around quiet people. I was there. I want you to understand that first. I'm not telling you something I heard third hand in a feeding hall or some story that got bigger every time it crossed a docking ring. I was standing maybe 20 paces from him when it happened, close enough to hear him breathe, close enough to see the exact second his face changed. And I have spent a very long time trying to describe that change to people who weren't there. I usually fail. The closest I can get is this. He smiled the whole time, through all of it. The insults, the threats, the slow, grinding disrespect that the conquered is so very good at. He smiled like it cost him nothing. And we all thought, every single one of us in that chamber, that the smile was the man. We were wrong. The smile was the lid on the jar. So let me set this up properly, because if I just jump to the part everyone wants to hear, you'll miss why it mattered. You'll think it was just violence. It wasn't. Violence is cheap. Anybody can break a thing. What I watched that day was something else, and you can't feel the weight of it unless you know where we all started. My name doesn't matter much. You can call me Ren. I'm Tessulan. We're the tall, gray-skinned ones with the second set of eyelids, the species everyone hires for clerical work because we don't blink at the wrong moment and we remember everything. Which is, I suppose, why I'm still telling this story all these cycles later. I remember everything. I'd give a lot to forget some of it. The good and the bad both. Back then, I was a protocol aide on Orly's station. If you've never seen Orly's, picture this. A gas giant the color of old bruises, this enormous swirling thing that takes up half the sky no matter where you stand. And caught in orbit around it, this station, not a ship, a city. Old. Older than most of the species that walk its halls. The conquered built it back when they still pretended the galaxy was a partnership instead of a leash, and they built it to impress. Towers of grown crystal, corridors so wide you could fly a shuttle down them. Gravity plating tuned so perfectly you forgot you were standing on metal in the void, until you looked out a viewport and saw the dark. The sounds are what I remember most. Orly's never went quiet. There was always this low hum under everything, the station breathing, cooling systems, the whisper of the air recyclers, somewhere far off always the chime of an arriving ship, and voices. 40, 50 species at any given time, all talking over each other in a dozen translated tongues, and the translator implants doing their best, lagging just a half-second behind so every conversation had this strange double echo to it. I loved it. I won't pretend I didn't. I was young and I thought I was at the center of the galaxy. I thought I understood power too. That's the part that embarrasses me now. See, the High Conquered ran everything. 12 council seats, 12 of the oldest and wealthiest species, and they had run the show for so long that none of them could even imagine it running any other way. They didn't rule with armies, not really. They ruled with the idea that they were inevitable. That resistance was a child's tantrum. That every younger species would eventually grow up, calm down, and take the comfortable little seat the conquered set aside for them at the very edge of the table. And the humans. The humans had just shown up. You have to understand how new humanity was to all this. The galaxy had known about Earth for, less than 2 of my lifetimes. They'd come out of their corner loud and fast, the way new species do, and the conquered had done what it always did. Smiled. Welcomed them, gave them a tiny delegation office on a low ring, a single non-voting observer seat, and a stack of treaties so long and so dense that everyone assumed the humans would drown in them and learn their place. That was the plan anyway, pacify them with paperwork. And on the surface it looked like it was working. Humanity sent one ambassador to Orly's. One. A woman named Inez Calloway. And she came with almost nothing, a small staff, a modest suite of rooms, and exactly 1 guard. 1 guard, for an entire species presence on the most important station in the sector. The other delegations brought entourages. The Vosk ambassador traveled with 30 armored honor blades and never went anywhere without at least 8 of them flanking her, all of them clicking and posturing. The Yelthi council member had a whole shoaling pod of attendants. Even small, poor delegations scraped together a dozen bodies just to seem important, because on Aurelies the size of your shadow was the size of your worth. And humanity sent one woman and one guard. We laughed about it. I'm ashamed to say that. In the aid pools between shifts we laughed. Did you see the humans? They brought a single soldier. Maybe they think this is a vacation. It became a little joke. The human delegation as a punchline. The Concord's most senior protocol officers would refer to Ambassador Calloway's office as the broom closet, and everyone would do the little air flutter that's the Tessulan version of laughing. The guard's name was Holt. Sergeant Elias Holt. I want to be careful here because hindsight makes everyone want to describe a man like Holt as obviously dangerous. Oh, you could just tell. No, you couldn't. That's the whole point. That's what I'm trying to make you feel. He looked tired. That's the honest truth. The first time I really registered him, not just as the human guard, but as a person, was in a transit corridor on the 14th ring, early in a shift cycle when the lights were still dim. He was standing at parade rest outside the human suite, and he looked more than anything like a man who had not slept enough in a very long time. He was older than the humans usually sent for that kind of work, gray coming in at his temples, lines around his eyes, deep ones, the kind you get from squinting into bad light or bad situations for years. He was big by human standards, but not huge. There were a dozen species on Aurelies that would tower over him, broad through the shoulders, hands that looked like they'd done actual work. He wore a plain dark uniform with almost no decoration on it, which we all read as low rank, unimportant, and only much later did I learn what humans use that kind of plainness to mean. And he smiled. He smiled at everyone, genuinely as far as any of us could tell. Maintenance crews, kitchen staff, junior aides like me, he learned names. He'd nod and say good cycle and ask how your work was going, and he'd actually wait for the answer. He learned my name in the second week. Wren, right. The one who logs the council minutes. I remember being absurdly pleased that this human knew who I was. The senior species found him quaint, a novelty. The Concord counselors treated him like furniture. They'd walk past him into a chamber and not even glance, the way you don't glance at a door. The Vosk honor blades, the proud ones, they openly mocked him. They'd swagger past in their lacquered plating and click their mandibles and make the gesture their species uses for prey animals. Holt would just smile and nod, like they'd wished him well. I genuinely thought he was simple. Forgive me. I did. I thought this poor human, he doesn't even understand he's being insulted. He understood every word. He filed every single one away. I learned that later too. Now here's the thing I need you to sit with, because it's the load-bearing wall of this whole story. The Concord didn't just look down on humanity. They had decided to do something about it. I wasn't supposed to know. Aides aren't supposed to know anything. But I logged the council minutes, and you can't log minutes without overhearing the conversations that happen in the corridors between sessions, the ones that never make it into any record. And in the cycles leading up to that day, those corridor conversations had a flavor I didn't like. There was a vote coming, a big one. The Concord was going to formally redraw the trade boundaries of the Outer Arm, the region where humanity had most of its young colonies. On paper, it was about navigation rights and tariff harmonization, all that bloodless language. In practice, it would have strangled the human worlds, routed their shipping through Concord-controlled choke points, taxed them into dependence, made a species that had just learned to stand on its own go right back to crawling and be grateful for it. And they were going to do it with humanity sitting in the room, with Ambassador Calloway watching, because that was the message. We can take everything from you while you sit there and smile, and there is nothing your one tired soldier can do about it. The counselors thought it was a masterstroke. I heard the Vosk counselor say, in a corridor to the Yelthi counselor, that the genius of it was that the humans would have to thank them. Have to. Because the alternative was being cut off entirely. He thought that was hilarious. He did the long Vosk laugh, the one that sounds like stones in a bag. So that was the board the day it all happened. The conquered 12 old powers sure of themselves, the galaxy's delegations, all watching to see the humans get put in their place. The Vosk and their swagger, Ambassador Calloway with her tiny office and her single guard, and Sergeant Elias Holt, standing at the back wall smiling. The lid on the jar. The day itself started ordinary. That's almost always how these things go, I've found. The big days don't announce themselves. They put on the same gray coat as every other day and they wait. I was working the main council chamber. The Spire Hall, we called it, the heart of Aurelis, this vast circular room with the 12 high seats arranged in a ring and the floor below for delegations and observers. The ceiling was grown crystal, and Aurelis tuned it so you could see the gas giant turning overhead, that great bruised eye, slow and silent and enormous. People said the Conquered built it that way on purpose, to remind you how small you were, to make you feel watched from above. The vote was scheduled for that session. The outer arm redraw. The room was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Every delegation had sent someone because everyone wanted to witness it. The Vosk had brought a full honor guard, 12 blades in their best lacquer, lined up along the eastern arc like they were the ones being honored. The human delegation arrived last. I watched them come in. Ambassador Calloway first, a small woman, dark-haired, with a stillness to her that I'd never paid attention to before. And behind her, one step back and to the left, Holt. Just the two of them. In that enormous room full of armored honor guards and shoaling pods and assistants, just one woman and one tired man. The room noticed. There was a ripple of that low cross-species amusement, the kind you feel more than hear. The Vosk honor blades clicked their mandibles. The lead one, a big male named Caruth, I learned his name afterward. You don't forget the names afterward. Caruth made the pray gesture again, slow and deliberate, right at Holt. Right at him, so everyone could see. Holt smiled at him, nodded, took up his position at the back wall, hands folded, weight even, eyes calm. I was logging. I had my recorder up and I caught all of it. I still have it, actually. I've watched it more times than is healthy. And in the recording you can see what I couldn't see in the moment, because in the moment I was looking at the wrong things. You can see Holt's eyes. While everyone else was watching the high seats, watching the ambassador's posture and the counselors settle in, Holt was watching the room. Slowly, methodically, left to right and back again. The exits, the honor blades, the crystal ceiling, the little maintenance hatches set into the lower wall that nobody was supposed to notice. He counted things. You can see his eyes stop and hold just for a beat on each Vosk blade, on each door, on the counselor's private security up in the high seats. He was mapping the room. He never stopped smiling while he did it. The session opened the way they always did. The high speaker, the rotating chair, that cycle it was the ancient Yelthi counselor, Voren, this drifting jellyfish-pale thing in a containment harness, called the room to order. There were the formalities, the recitations, the endless Conquered ritual that exists mostly to remind everyone how long the Conquered has existed. And then they got to the redraw. I won't bore you with the language. It went on for a long time, all of it dressed up in that bloodless administrative tongue. Navigation corridors, harmonized tariffs, custodial oversight of the outer arm waypoints. But underneath every soft word was the hard thing, and everybody in the room knew the hard thing, and the humans most of all. They presented it as already decided. That was the cruelty of it. There was no real debate. The Conquered had the votes, everyone knew they had the votes, and so the whole session was theater. A long, slow performance of taking something from someone while making them watch and calling it generosity. The high speaker invited the human ambassador to respond. As a courtesy, a non-voting observer's right to speak, which meant nothing, which everyone knew meant nothing. Calloway stood. And she was, I have to be honest, she was magnificent in a way I didn't have the wisdom to appreciate at the time. She didn't beg. She didn't rage. She laid out calmly and clearly exactly what the redraw would do to 14 human colonies, the famine timelines, the shipping collapse, the children, she said. She named some of the colonies. She named the number of children on them. She did it without raising her voice, and the room got quieter than I'd ever heard it. And for a moment, one moment, I thought maybe the calmness was working. Maybe someone up in the high seats would feel something. Then the Vosk counselor laughed. The stones in a bag laugh. Loud. On purpose. He cut right across her in the middle of a sentence about children, and he said, I have it logged word for word. He said the human ambassador should be grateful the conquered was offering custodianship at all, that a species so young and so weak could hardly expect to manage its own affairs, and that perhaps in a few hundred cycles, if humanity proved it could behave, the conquered might reconsider. And then he said the thing. He looked down at Calloway and then past her, at Holt against the back wall, and he said, You bring one soldier to a room like this. One. It tells us everything we need to know about what your kind is worth. The room laughed. Not all of it, but enough. The Vosk blades clicked. Some of the smaller delegations, the ones that wanted to stay in the conquered's good favor, did the polite courtier laugh. The crystal ceiling turned overhead slow, that great bruised eye watching all of us. And I looked at Holt. He was still smiling. But this is the part I can never quite explain to people who weren't there. The smile was still on his face, the exact same shape. Nothing about it had visibly changed. And yet something had, something behind it. Like a house where all the lights are still on, but you suddenly know, you just know, that everyone inside has gone very still and is listening. His eyes had stopped moving. For the whole session they'd been mapping, sweeping, counting, and now they had stopped. They were fixed on the Vosk counselor, completely still. 2 points of total attention in a face that was still, somehow, politely smiling. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I didn't know why. I didn't have a reason. It was just an animal thing, the oldest thing, the part of you older than language that knows when a predator has entered the clearing. I leaned over to the aide next to me, a pal named Tisk, good worker, terrible gossip, and I whispered, Look at the human. Tisk glanced over, shrugged. He's just standing there. He was, that's true, he was just standing there. But I'd seen it, and I couldn't unsee it. What happened next happened because the conquered couldn't leave well enough alone. They had won. The vote hadn't even been called yet, and they had already won. The redraw was going to pass. Calloway had said her piece. The humiliation was complete. Any sensible power would have moved on to the formal vote and gotten its victory cleanly. But contempt makes you stupid. I've learned that if I've learned nothing else. Contempt always wants more than it needs. The Vosk counselor wasn't satisfied with humiliating Calloway. He wanted a trophy. So he made a proposal, an amendment, he called it, with a little flourish, that, as a gesture of good faith, and to demonstrate the new spirit of cooperation, the human delegation should immediately surrender its diplomatic security detail to conquered custody for the duration of the transition. In plain words, hand over your one guard, right now, in front of everyone. Disarm him, take him into custody, and let us walk him out of this room like a captured animal so that the message is not just heard but seen. It was outrageous. It was a violation of about 9 different protocols that I personally had logged over the cycles. Diplomatic security was sacrosanct. It was one of the oldest conquered laws, older than half the species in the room, because back when the conquered was young it had learned the hard way what happens when delegations stop trusting that their people are safe. And the High Speaker allowed it. That's the part I still can't fully forgive. Old Voren drifting in that harness, the supposed neutral chair, Voren allowed the amendment to the floor, because the conquered wanted it. And Voren had spent 10,000 cycles, giving the conquered what it wanted. The vote on the amendment was called. It passed. Of course it passed. And the High Speaker turned to the human ambassador and said, with the gentle, awful politeness of the very powerful, that the human delegation was now required to surrender its security personnel to the honor blades of the Vosk, effective immediately, and that any refusal would be treated as an act of aggression against the High Conquered. The Vosk counselor was delighted. He gestured to Caruth, the big lead blade, the one who'd made the praise sign, and Caruth and 3 of his blades broke formation and started walking across the chamber floor toward Holt. Lacquered plating, mandibles clicking, the slow, swaggering, certain walk of soldiers who have never once in their lives lost. The whole room turned to watch. And I watched the human. Ambassador Calloway moved first, actually. She stepped sideways, putting herself between Holt and the approaching blades. Small woman, unarmed. And she said, clear and cold, that this was a violation of the sovereign accords, that Sergeant Holt was protected personnel, and that the Conquered was making a mistake it could not take back. The High Speaker told her to step aside or be removed. And here is the moment, the hinge of the whole thing. I've slowed the recording down so many times. Holt put his hand on Calloway's shoulder. Gently, just a touch, and he stepped around her and he put himself between her and the 4 advancing honor blades. He moved her behind him with the most ordinary, unhurried motion, like a man stepping in front of someone in a doorway. And he looked at Caruth. And he stopped smiling. I want you to understand what that was like, because I'd seen him smile for weeks, cycles. The smile was so constant it had become invisible. It was just Holt's face. The whole station had built its entire understanding of this man on the foundation of that smile, harmless, tired, friendly, simple. The lid on the jar, sealed so long we'd forgotten there was anything underneath. And it just went away. It didn't twist into a snarl. He didn't bare his teeth, didn't shout, didn't make any of the threat displays that the rest of us species use, all the puffing and clicking and rising and posturing. It was the opposite. Everything in his face just settled, smoothed out, went quiet and flat and absolutely, totally calm. His eyes didn't widen. They narrowed just slightly, focused down to that same 2-point stillness I'd seen earlier, except now it was aimed at 4 armored soldiers walking toward him. And the temperature of the room changed. I swear it did. I know that doesn't make sense, that air doesn't actually get colder because a single unarmed man stopped smiling. But every Tessulan in that chamber felt their second eyelids draw down on instinct, the way they do in deep cold or deep fear. I looked around and we'd all done it at once. A whole row of clerks, eyelids halfway shut, staring at one man. Even the room noticed. The laughter that had been bubbling around the edges died. The polite courtier chuckle stopped. Somewhere up in the observer galleries, a conversation cut off mid-word. Caruth noticed too. I saw it. The lead blade swagger hitched, just for a single step, just for a fraction of a beat. Some ancient part of even a Vosk warrior, all that lacquer and pride, registered something it didn't have a word for and didn't like. But he kept coming. Of course he kept coming. They always keep coming. That's what pride is for. And Holt spoke. His voice was quiet. So quiet that I had to push the recorder gain up afterward just to be sure I'd caught it. He didn't shout it across the room. He said it almost gently, almost to himself, in that flat, calm voice, looking right at Caruth, while the great bruised eye of the gas giant turned slowly overhead and the whole Conquered held its breath. He said, "You should have left her out of it. I'll tell you what happened next in part 2. Because what happened next is the reason I'm telling you any of this at all, and it deserves the room to breathe. But I'll leave you here, at the hinge, with the picture I still see when I close my eyes after all these cycles. A vast crystal chamber, 12 old powers in their high seats, certain of everything, 40 species watching, half of them laughing, 4 armored soldiers crossing the floor with the easy confidence of creatures who have never been told no. And 1 tired man in a plain dark coat, standing in front of a small woman, having just, very quietly, stopped smiling. The council thought they were in control. They were about to find out what the smile had been holding back. You should have left her out of it. 6 words, quiet, and then the chamber held its breath. I've gone back to that moment so many times. Not the violence, I'll get to the violence. I know that's what you came for, but that little gap right after he spoke. That half second of nothing. Because in that half second, you could still feel the whole room making a choice without knowing it was choosing. The honor blades could have stopped. Caruth could have read the thing his body was already telling him to read, that hitch in his swagger, that animal twitch under all the lacquer, and he could have slowed down. Sent for more blades, done it carefully. The conquered had every advantage. 12 blades in the room, station security. Numbers, weapons, the law itself bent to their side. If they'd been patient, Holt was one man and there was nothing he could have done. But you don't get to be a Vosk honor blade by being patient. You get there by never, ever, being the one who flinched. So Caruth laughed. It was a forced laugh, I think now. A laugh to cover the thing he'd felt. He clicked his mandibles at his 3 blades, said something in fast Vosk that the translators didn't bother catching, and the 4 of them closed the last few paces fast, the way you rush something you've decided not to be afraid of. Caruth reached out one armored hand to grab Holt by the front of his plain dark coat. I have watched the recording at 1/10 speed. I have watched it frame by frame, and I still cannot tell you exactly how the next 2 seconds happened, because Holt did not move like a person moves. People telegraph, all of us, every species. Before you strike, before you grab, before you run, your body leans, your weight shifts, your breath catches, some part of you gets ready and the readiness shows. It's how we read each other. It's how a guard knows trouble is coming before it comes. Holt had spent weeks reading this entire station that way. He knew we all did it. He didn't do it. There was no wind-up, no shift. One frame he was standing perfectly still with his hands folded, calm, flat, settled. The next frame Caruth's outstretched arm was going the wrong way. That's the only way I can describe what I saw in real time. The big honor blade reached out, and then his own arm was somewhere it shouldn't be, and his own weight was carrying him somewhere he didn't want to go, and the lacquered plating that made the Vosk so proud and so heavy was suddenly the worst thing he owned because Holt hadn't tried to stop him. He'd helped him, taken all that confident forward momentum and just guided it, down, sideways, into the floor. Caruth hit the crystal floor of the spire hall flat on his back hard enough that I felt it through my own feet from 20 paces away. The sound of it, all that armor against grown crystal, went up into the high ceiling and came back down, and for 1/2 second it was the only sound in the entire chamber. And Holt was already moving to the second blade. Here's what I need you to understand, because this is the part the cheap versions of this story always get wrong. They tell it like a slaughter, like the human went berserk and tore through the Vosk. That's not what I saw. What I saw was the most controlled thing I have ever witnessed in my life. He didn't kill anyone, think about that. 4 armored honor blades, the proudest soldiers the conquered could put in a room, and a man who clearly could have ended any of them, and he didn't. Every single thing he did was measured. The second blade came in swinging and Holt stepped inside the swing, did something to the blade's elbow joint that made a sound none of us wanted to hear, and put him on the ground next to Caruth. Not dead. Disarmed. Done. The third blade he took the weapon from, just took it, peeled it out of the soldier's grip like taking something from a child, and he didn't turn it on anyone. He dropped it. He let it clatter to the floor and kicked it away, and then he put the third blade down. He was making a point. I understood that even in the moment, even with my second eyelids halfway shut and my heart's hammering. He wasn't fighting to win. He'd already won. He was fighting to teach. Every motion said the same thing, over and over in a language older than any of ours. I am choosing not to kill you. Notice that I am choosing. The fourth blade, the youngest, I think, the smallest, the fourth blade stopped. Just stopped. 3 of his squad were on the floor in about as many seconds, and the human was standing in the middle of them, not even breathing hard, the same flat calm on his face, And the fourth blade looked at all of it, and his weapon arm came down, and he took one step back. Holt looked at him and gave him the smallest nod. Good choice. And then he turned back to face the high seats. The chamber was chaos by then. Not movement chaos, nobody was moving. Everybody was frozen, but sound chaos. Delegations shouting. The Yelthi pod making a high keening noise. Up in the high seats the counselors were on their feet, all 12 of them, and the Vosk counselor, the one who'd started all of this, was screaming for station security. And station security came. Of course they did. A full response team poured in through the main doors, conquered security, armed, armored, a dozen of them, weapons up. Real weapons, not honor blade ceremonial lacquer, the kind that put holes in things. They fanned out across the chamber floor and leveled everything they had at one man. And Holt put his hands up. He just stopped, raised his open hands to shoulder height, slow and clear, the universal gesture, the one that crosses every species line because it's the oldest sentence there is. Empty hands, no threat. He stood there in the middle of 3 down honor blades with a dozen weapons pointed at him, and he surrendered. And the calm never left his face. The Vosk counselor was howling for them to fire. I heard it. It's on the recording. He was leaning over the rail of his high seat, screaming that the human had assaulted the conquered, that he was a danger, that they should put him down where he stood. And the security team didn't fire. I've thought about why a lot. I think part of it was that Holt had surrendered, and you don't fire on surrender, not even conquered security, not with 40 delegations watching and recording. But I think part of it was simpler than that. I think they just watched what those hands did to 3 armored blades in 3 seconds, and now those hands were open and raised and pointed at nothing. And some deep part of every soldier in that room understood that the open hands were a gift. That this man was letting them point weapons at him. And you do not fire on a thing that is choosing, second by second, to let you live. So nobody fired. There was a long, terrible, frozen moment with 12 weapons up and one man with his hands raised, and the gas giant turning slow and silent overhead. And then Ambassador Calloway spoke. She'd been behind him the whole time. He'd never let her out from behind him, not once, even in the middle of all of it. Somehow, through all that motion, he'd kept his body between her and the threat the entire time. I only noticed that watching the recording afterward. In the moment I didn't see it, but it's there. Wherever the danger was, he was between it and her, the whole time. Now she stepped out from behind him, slowly, and she walked forward past him, past the downed blades, into the center of the chamber floor with a dozen weapons still up, and she was so small and so calm and so completely unafraid that the whole room turned to look at her instead. And she said, I have this logged, word for word, and I'll carry it the rest of my life. She said, now you've seen it. That was all at first, just that. Now you've seen it, into the silence. And then she turned slowly and she looked up at all 12 high seats, one after another, taking her time, and she said, we sent one. You asked yourselves why a species would send a single soldier to a room like this, and you decided it was because we were weak, because we didn't understand the rules, because we couldn't count. She let that sit. We can count. We counted very carefully. We sent one because one was all that the courtesy of this chamber required, and because we chose to believe that we would never need more than one, that the sovereign accords meant something, that a delegate's people were safe in this room. She looked at the Vosk counselor. You taught us otherwise, just now, in front of everyone. You voted to take our people from us by force, in a chamber that swore they'd be safe, and you sent your proudest soldiers to drag a man out in chains to make us watch. She gestured without looking at the 3 blades on the floor. That's the one we sent. Imagine the ones we kept home. I want to be careful and honest here, because the cheap version of this story turns Calloway's speech into a threat, and it wasn't. Not really. There was steel in it, yes. But what she did next is the part that mattered, the part that the screaming Vosk counselor never understood even as it was happening to him. She didn't threaten war. She offered them a way out. She turned back to the high seats and her voice changed, got quieter, almost gentle, and she said that humanity did not want this. That the redraw, the choke points, the slow strangling of 14 colonies and the children on them, none of it had to happen. That her people had come to this chamber in good faith, with one guard and an open hand, because they had wanted to be a partner and not a problem. And then she said the thing that broke it open. She said, "You still get to decide what kind of room this was today. You can call this an attack. You can put my sergeant in a cell, and you can pass your redraw, and you can win. And then every young species in the outer arm will know exactly what your courtesy is worth, and exactly what it costs to trust your accords, and you will spend the next 1,000 years finding out what that knowledge does to an empire that runs on everyone agreeing to be afraid." She paused. Or. The whole chamber leaned in on that word, or. Or, she said, "You withdraw the amendment, you withdraw the redraw. You let my sergeant walk out of this room beside me the way he walked in, and we all agree together on the record that today the conquered remembered what its own oldest law was for, and humanity remembers that the conquered, when it mattered, chose well." She spread her hands, the same open-handed gesture Holt had used, and I don't think that was an accident. "That's the whole offer. It's the only one we've got. And it expires the moment one of those weapons goes off." It came down to the high speaker, old Voren, the drifting pale thing in the harness, the supposed neutral chair who'd allowed all of this in the first place. And I watched Voren do the math. You could see it. 10,000 cycles of reading rooms, of surviving, of knowing exactly which way the wind moved before anyone else felt it. And all of that experience now pointed at one conclusion that the Vosk counselor was too proud and too furious to see. The conquered had already lost. The instant Holt put Caruth on the floor, the thing the conquered ran on the idea of its own inevitability, the belief that resistance was a child's tantrum. That thing had cracked in public, in front of 40 species who were all recording. You couldn't uncrack it by firing a weapon. Firing a weapon would only prove Calloway's point louder. The only way to repair the crack was to pretend, loudly and officially, that it had never happened. To take the way out she was offering, where the conquered got to keep its dignity in exchange for giving up a redraw it didn't actually need. She'd built him a door with the conquered's pride still hanging on it. Voren took it. The high speaker called for order, and old Voren's voice, when it came, was smooth as still water, like none of the last few minutes had rattled anything at all. Voren announced that there had been a regrettable misunderstanding, that the amendment regarding diplomatic security was improperly raised and was stricken from the record, that upon further reflection, the chamber would defer the outer arm redraw pending additional consultation with all affected parties. Deferred. Defer is a conquered word for killed quietly so no one has to admit it died. That redraw never came back, not in my time on Orales. And then Voren thanked Ambassador Calloway for her wisdom and restraint, and thanked the High Conquered for its enduring commitment to the sovereign accords, and ordered station security to stand down and withdraw, and called for the chamber to recess. Just like that, the whole thing wrapped up in the language of a clerical correction, as if 4 armored honor blades hadn't just been folded up on the floor, as if the most powerful body in the sector hadn't just blinked in public at one tired man with his hands raised. The security weapons came down, the team filed out. The Vosk counselor was still sputtering, but nobody was listening to him anymore. And there is no lonelier thing in the galaxy than a powerful person the moment everyone stops listening. Holt lowered his hands. He looked at the 3 blades on the floor. They were being helped up now, slow, shaky, their lacquer scuffed and their pride somewhere they'd never find it again. And he did something I will never forget. He reached down and helped Caruth up. The big honor blade who'd made the prey gesture at him, who'd come to drag him out in chains. Holt reached down, took him by the forearm and pulled him to his feet, steadied him, and the smile came back. The same easy, tired, friendly smile we'd all seen for weeks, like flipping a switch, like closing a lid. He said something to Caruth quiet just between them. I was close enough this time. I caught it. He said, "No hard feelings. You were just doing your job." Caruth, this proud, ancient warrior, this creature who had never lost, Caruth stared at the human's outstretched, helping hand and at the smile, and I watched something break and rearrange itself behind the big blade's eyes. He didn't say anything. The Vosk don't have words for the place he'd just been taken to. But he held Holt's forearm a moment longer than he had to, and then he let go, and he gathered his blades, and they left. And he never made the prey gesture again, not at any human. Not ever that I heard of. Calloway came and stood beside her sergeant. She looked up at him. And this is such a small thing, but it's the thing my mind keeps. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just reached up and brushed a bit of floor dust off the shoulder of his plain dark coat, the way you'd tidy up someone before they walk out somewhere important. And the two of them walked out of the Spire Hall together, one woman, one tired man, the same way they'd walked in. The chamber stayed silent until the doors closed behind them. I think about why it worked. I've had a lot of cycles to think about it. It wasn't the fighting. I know that's the part you wanted and I gave it to you, but the fighting was never the point and it was never what changed the galaxy. Honor blades get put on the floor sometimes. Soldiers lose fights. That's not history, that's just Tuesday. What changed everything was the restraint. It was the open hands. It was a man who had just proven he could kill 4 soldiers choosing, in front of everyone, not 2. It was an ambassador who had every reason to threaten war, offering peace instead, and building her enemy a door to walk through with his pride intact. The conquered ran on a story. The story said, "Power is the willingness to take. The strong take, the weak are taken from, and everyone in between stays quiet and grateful." That was the whole machine. That was the thing the redraw was really about, not trade lanes, but keeping the story true. And the humans broke the story. Not by being stronger takers. By showing the whole chamber that there was a kind of strength the story didn't account for, strength that could take everything and chose, deliberately, in plain sight, to take nothing. A man who could have killed and didn't. A people who could have made it a war and made it a door instead. You can't run an empire of fear on people who have seen that, because the whole machine depends on everyone believing that strength always takes. And once you've watched strength choose mercy on purpose, where everyone can see, the fear doesn't work the same way ever again. The spell breaks, quietly, in a recess chamber, with a clerk in the corner getting all of it on the record. The recording got out, of course. They always do. I won't pretend I had nothing to do with that. I logged the council minutes. The minutes belonged to the conquered. But the recording, the one with Holt's eyes, the one where you can see the exact frame the smile leaves his face, that recording found its way to a great many places it was never supposed to go. I've never told anyone that until now. I'm old enough now that I don't think they'll come for me. It spread through the outer arm first. The young species. The ones who'd spent their whole short histories being told to sit quietly in the comfortable seat at the edge of the table and be grateful. And they watched one tired man stop smiling, and they watched an ambassador build a door out of mercy, and something shifted. Not overnight. Real things never shift overnight. But the redraw was dead, and then the next redraw, somewhere else, quietly never happened either. And somewhere a small delegation that would have stayed silent decided to say no, and meant it, and wasn't punished for it, because the conquered had learned, just a little, just enough, that the cost of pushing wasn't always what it used to be. The conquered didn't fall. I want to be honest about that too. This isn't the story where the empire crumbles and everyone's free. It's still there. It still has its 12 seats and its old certainties and its bloodless administrative language. Some things grind on. But it pushes less now. It listens more. And every counselor who takes one of those high seats hears the story, sooner or later, of the day the human stopped smiling. It gets passed down. It's the thing they don't put in the official histories, but every one of them knows. A warning folded inside a memory. Be careful what you decide a quiet thing is. Be careful what you think a smile means. I saw Holt one more time years later. He was older, grayer, out of the uniform by then. He was on orderlies on some quiet civilian business, and he came through the records office and he recognized me. Wren, right? The one who logged the minutes. After all that time, he remembered my name. He still did that. I asked him. I'd waited years to ask him. I said, "That day, when you stopped smiling, were you afraid?" He thought about it for a long moment. He had an honest face, that man, even when it gave nothing away. And he said, "Every second." I must have looked surprised because he smiled, the tired one, the real one, and he explained it the only way he ever explained anything, which was simply. He said the smile was never fake. He said he smiled because he liked people, and most people most of the time deserve a smile. He said the calm wasn't the absence of fear. He said the calm was what fear turns into when you've decided, all the way down, that there's a thing you will not let happen, and you've already made your peace with what it'll cost you to stop it. He said by the time he stopped smiling, the deciding was already done. The fear was still there. It just didn't have a vote anymore. And then he said the thing I've carried longer than anything else from that whole day. He said, "The smile's not the lie, Wren. The smile's the truth. Stopping is just the truth getting smaller so it's harder to miss." Then he asked how my work was going, and he actually waited for the answer. So that's the story. The real one, from someone who was there, 20 paces away, close enough to hear him breathe. The council thought they were in control. They sat in their high seats under the turning eye of the gas giant, and they were so sure of the story they ran on that they couldn't imagine any other. They looked at one woman and one tired man, and they saw weakness, because weakness was what they needed to see. They never understood that the most dangerous thing in any room isn't the one who's posturing. It isn't the loudest, or the proudest, or the one with the most blades at his back. It's the quiet one in the corner who's been smiling at everyone, learning all your names, mapping all your doors. The one holding something down so steadily, for so long, that you forget there was ever anything to hold. You just better hope you never find out what the smile was for. Because the lid coming off a jar is loud. But the lid coming off quietly, that's the one that should scare you.